Hi readers, welcome back to my channel, Lila Wanders and Reads, and welcome to my weekend books. This week ends on February 28th, so it is the end of Black History Month. However, I do try to read books about Black history and Black characters throughout the year, so you'll be hearing more about that, especially since March is Women's History Month, and I'll get to that in a minute. When I was thinking about getting ready to do this video, I thought that I had a really good reading week, and I did in volume, but overall it turned out pretty meh. And spoiler alert, next week starts out a little bit meh too. Anywho, but let's get started. I started the week reading I Am Not Your Negro by Raoul Peck and James Baldwin. To compose his stunning documentary film, I Am Not Your Negro, acclaimed filmmaker Raoul Peck mined James Baldwin's published and unpublished oeuvre, selecting passages from his books, essays, letters, notes, and interviews that are every bit as incisive and pertinent now as they had ever been. Weaving these texts together, Peck brilliantly imagines the book that Baldwin never wrote. In his final years, Baldwin had envisioned a book about his three assassinated friends, Medgar Evans, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. His deeply personal notes for the project have never been published before. Anywho, the movie is fantastic. You can watch it. I think I watched it on Tubi for free. It's been now a week since I've watched it. If you read this as a standalone book, however, it doesn't seem to me a cohesive book about Medgar, Malcolm, or Martin. They're in there, but there are so many other people in there as well. So I recommend this as a supplement to the movie. You won't get the same experience if you read this as a standalone, in my opinion. However, as I was reading this, some things for me stand out more on the page when I see them in addition to watching the movie, that they're reinforced by reading it on the page. And I was reading this scene in here that James Baldwin is recounting about a meeting between Bobby Kennedy and Lorraine Hansberry. And I was a little bit embarrassed because I was like, I don't think I know who that is. But I do know who that is. She wrote A Raisin in the Sun. And that sent me down a whole rabbit hole, which will become a subject for another video in March for Women's History Month. I'm really excited for not this, but another book that I have in there that I'm debating on whether I want to read right now. But in the scene, it also reminds me of how far we have not come. Lorraine says to Bobby, "But I am very worried," she said, "about the state of the civilization which produced that photograph of the white cop standing on that Negro woman's neck in Birmingham." Then she smiled, and I am glad that she was not smiling at me. There are a number of quotes like that. I could sit here and read to you from this. They're all in the movie as well. But like I said, when I read them on the page after having watched the movie, it just kind of reinforced them to me. So glad that I read this and that I watched the movie. But then things start going a little downhillish. I read Butcher and Blackbird in a night, so it was a quick read, and I have the whole series. I think I gave this 3 stars, but it's really more 2.5 for me. I did not like this enough to keep it, and we are having a book swap next week at the book club I'm part of, and I might give this whole series away. There's only 3 books. I just don't care about it. When a chance encounter sparks an unlikely bond between rival murderers Sloane and Rowan, they find something elusive, the friendship of 2 like-minded, pitch-black souls who just happen to enjoy killing other serial killers. From small-town West Virginia to upscale California, and from downtown Boston to rural Texas, The two hunters collide in an annual game of blood and suffering, one that pits them against the most dangerous monsters in the country. But as their friendship develops into something more, the restless ghosts left in their wake are only a few steps behind, ready to claim more than just their newfound love. I'll say this, there's a part at the end that I did like, but I just have got hair in my face. I just did not like the characters enough. I told my work colleague this, I thought the murder parts were a little bit boring, except for the very end. Now, here's where I'm going to go into trying to get this hair out of my eye. Sorry. Here's when I go into a little bit of a spoilery bit. Very little. So the spice in this book doesn't come till towards the end of the book. And I didn't like it. I felt like whatever his name was, Rowan, the guy, turned into an entirely different guy whenever they would have sex. There's a portion, I almost DNF'd it because she uses the phrase even still, and I fucking hate that. But then I got to this portion where he's wooing her. And what he does is he orders groceries he's a chef. He orders groceries to be sent to her house, and then he hides behind a tree, calls her, and tells her how to make the dish from the ingredients that he sent her. And I was like, oh, I love this. He's thoughtful. It's something fresh and new. But then when they go to have sex, I don't know the right word to say. Dominant isn't the word, but it's like turns into a completely different person. Like, this is what you get. This is what you deserve. I'm going to give you it. It's just a complete turn off for me. And look, there's a time and a place for that, but it was every time. And it just, like I said, huge turn off for me. So I don't think I will be finishing that series. Not if every guy's going to be like that. Next up was another book that I had mixed feelings on. I had mixed feelings on several of these books, and that is Daughters of the Nile by Zara Barry. I wrote notes for myself, and I'm trying to stick to them so I don't forget any of them. I should have brought this with me, but the one great thing I learned about this is about a woman named Doria Shafiq, who was an Egyptian feminist. Zara herself is Irish and Egyptian, so that's a combo. So this is set in 3 timelines, which is a thing I normally love. Paris, 1940. Fatiha bin Khalid's life is changed forever when she befriends the Muslim feminist Doria Shafiq. But after returning to Egypt and dedicating years to the fight for women's rights, she struggles to reconcile her political ideals with the realities of motherhood. That is spot on. Cairo, 1966. After being publicly shamed when her relationship with a bisexual boyfriend is revealed, Fatiha's daughter is faced with an impossible decision. Should Yasmina accept a life she didn't choose, or will she leave her home and country in pursuit of independence? She does. That's spot on too. Bristol, 2011. I'm going to get a little bit spoilery here as well. British-born Nadia is battling with an identity crisis and a severe case of herpes. Feeling unfulfilled after a particularly disastrous one-night stand, she moves in with her old-fashioned Aunt Yasmina and realizes that she must discover her purpose in the modern world. Yes, true. The back of this book, unlike some, is spot on what happens in the book. But what I found, so it's revealed, here's the spoilery bit, in this that both Yasmina and Nadia are bisexual. Fine, I don't have anything against that, except it came so abruptly. Yasmina, you read whole chapters and you don't realize she's bisexual until she wakes up in Iran thinking about some girl. And I'm like, where did that come from? She'd had this whole relationship with the bisexual guy. All her other relationships were with guys. You never heard it or felt it from her. So it was just rather abrupt. And the same thing happens with Nadia. What I liked about this is trying to figure out who you are in a world and a religion or a culture that doesn't really want you to be free. I liked that. I think I would have liked to have read this if Zara was maybe, the author, was maybe 10 years older or had the experience of the age of Yasmina or Fatia behind her. I just felt she was more like Nadia's age, and so it lacked and it dragged a little bit for me. That said, there was a lot of this that I really loved about... okay, I said it dragged a little bit. It did in spots, but somewhere in the middle of the book, I actually fell into the story. It's mostly Yasmina and Fatia's stories. And again, I loved learning about Doria Shafiq. I found a whole book on her that I will be reading at some point in the future. So I'm glad that I read this, even though it was not really the most comfortable of reads. I felt sometimes disconnected. Speaking of disconnected, I finished out the week with The Strange Case of Jane O by Karen Thompson Walker. I wrote in the middle a couple of things. But let me start by reading you the blurb, or whatever you call it, synopsis. A year after her child is born, Jane suffers a series of strange episodes: amnesia, premonitions, hallucinations, and an inexplicable sense of dread. 3 days after her first visit to a psychiatrist, Jane suddenly goes missing. A day later, she's found unconscious in Brooklyn's Prospect Park, in the midst of what seems to be an episode of dissociative fugue. I'm going to spoil a little bit on this too. Anyway, when she comes back, she doesn't remember what happens to her. What I loved about this was that it does talk about memory, and that an essential part of the proper memory function is the forgetting and clearing out of the less important memories. But I wrote two things in this. One, I said that one of the things that kept me going was I had a feeling that both the doctor and Jane, because it's told from both of their perspectives, are unreliable narrators, and I like that. But I also wrote, this feels from the narrative as though it's not occurring in 2018, but rather in 1818 or 1918. It felt far away for me. And I say it occurs in 2018. But the last letter that Jane writes, her perspectives told in letters, is in January of 2020. Here's where the spoiler comes in, if you want to fast forward a few minutes. So Jane's fugue states are, I guess, her going to a parallel world where in 2018 there was a huge pandemic, which was very similar to the pandemic we had in 2020. People died, she, in her parallel world, lost her child. And then the book ends in Jane's letter in January 2020, right before our pandemic. And I think the author missed a huge opportunity to put in our pandemic. And I don't know when she started writing it, but this is published in 2025. So it had to have been at an editor after 2020. So, okay, that is a huge miss for me, because we're about to go through a pandemic when she's ending this book, and there's just no mention of it. The parallel world theory isn't backed up by anything. I still think it could be anything. It could not be true. And the ending of this book was such a disappointment. I won't spoil that. Aside from the January 2020 part. But there's something that happens in that month that Jane writes about that was just such a disappointment for me. That I just like, why did you do that? Why did you end it like that? I have not read her New York Times bestselling book, The Age of Miracles. I won't read anything else by her again. I mean, it'd have to be insane. So anyway, all right, I was going to tell you what I'm reading next, but I accidentally finished it yesterday. I'm recording this on Sunday. Today I am going to finish audiobook. I've got like an hour and a half, less than, of The Coming of the Third Reich by Richard J. Evans. And then I swear this time I'm going to take a break for at least a week for audiobooks. I need to rest my brain. Have you read any of these books? I'd love to hear from you if you have. If you have a difference of opinion, bring it on. I'm fine with that as well. I like to hear different perspectives because there may be a way I hadn't considered something. And it could be I'm just going through a phase, but most of these books were problematic for me, except for I Am Not Your Negro. I love Baldwin. So that is it for this week. I'm not sure what I'm going to read next, and I'd love to hear what you're reading. As always, if you stuck with me this long, thank you for sharing my journey, and happy reading.